Now that we've analyzed the Atari 5200 on its own, it's time to throw it to the hypothetical gladiatorial games, where it will fight it out with the other game consoles of the early 1980s to see who will win your hard-earned spending money. Will the 5200 win gold, or will this be a sad story? Probably the latter. Hi, I'm Jacob with Video Game Retrospective. Last time we discussed the hardware of the 5200 and looked at the history that led to its 1982 launch. This time, we'll be doing things a little bit differently. You see, I think it's important to not look at a system in a vacuum. We need to take a look at how the 5200 compared to the other options that consumers could gravitate to. Now, by the time the 5200 was released, the Intellivision was already fizzling out, which is kind of ironic since it was the system that the 5200 was designed to beat. So we're not going to be focusing on that comparison. Instead, let's compare to the other super console, the Colecovision, a console we've covered extensively on this channel already. Both consoles launched as high-end super consoles that would finally bring true arcade gaming to the home. This is the battle where technical specs really mattered, but to be honest, even the most drastic difference between the two would only ever be barely noticeable to the untrained eye. There are plenty of example games that could be used to show the 5200 superiority over the ColecoVision, but there are plenty of situations that show the exact opposite as well. So I'm not really going to focus on the specific examples. In general, I would say that the 5200 was overall the more powerful system. The color palette I find nicer, and the 5200's control over its missile graphics were impressive. The 5200 also destroys the ColecoVision in sound capabilities. I enjoy the rich sound of the Pokey chip much better than the rather basic sounds of the ColecoVision. Overall, I do feel that even the most drastic examples of 5200 supremacy would not sway the normal consumer that much. Both systems were vast improvements over the 2600 or the Intellivision. It's sort of like asking someone who's only ever driven a busted-up Honda Civic to compare the differences between a Ferrari and a Lamborghini. So the graphics won't be the deciding fact. We need to look at other features and the general quality of both systems. First, let's look at the controllers. When our original video on the ColecoVision released, we received a ton of comments decrying that we didn't really talk about how much the ColecoVision controller sucked. Let's fix that. The ColecoVision controller was awful. The stick has an extreme case of stiffness, and the keypad is mushy and painful to the touch. Hot take though, I do actually like the feel of the side trigger buttons. They are springy with a satisfying, deep press. I should probably be more careful with how I describe controllers. As a plus, the ColecoVision used the same 9-pin game port connector as many other devices, so you could always swap your ColecoVision controller for a 2600 stick, or in modern times, a Sega Genesis controller. So which controller do I find worse? Well, the 5200 by far. It ultimately comes down to the proprietary port and the fact that a bad controller that works is still better than a bad controller that doesn't. I've literally never come across a broken ColecoVision controller. Meanwhile, I've literally never come across a working 5200 controller. The other thing I'd like to highlight is the pack-in game each system shipped with. The ColecoVision came with Donkey Kong, the most in-demand game of that era, and it's a pretty strong port from the arcades. And thanks to Coleco owning the home console rights to Donkey Kong, they chose not to release it at all on the 5200. Ooh, Coleco, you played dirty. Now, if the 5200 had natively been able to play Atari 8-bit games, this wouldn't have been a problem, since Atari published that version themselves, and it's certainly as good as the ColecoVision version. ColecoVision version, that's hard to say. So yeah, ColecoVision came with the hottest game of the era, and it looked great. In comparison, the 5200 came with Super Breakout. Now, don't get me wrong, I love a good game of Breakout, but this is not how you show off the graphical capability of your console. If anything, including Super Breakout as the pack-in title damaged the image of the 5200 more than it helped by being a good value. I think the system would have actually done better if it hadn't launched with a pack-in game at all. Having the 5200 release with a game that looks like that gives it a reputation of not being very much better at all than just the 2600. In fact, that's kind of the problem here in general. The library of the 5200 is almost all stuff you could get on the 2600. Granted, it would be worse, but it's still there. The last factor we need to discuss is price. The 5200 was quite expensive at $269. The Colecovision, on the other hand, was a full $90 less at $179, meaning you could easily afford a Colecovision and its Atari 2600 expansion module for less than the cost of a 5200 on its own. It's not really a surprise that Coleco sold 2 to 3 times as many systems as Atari sold 5200s. So when comparing the Atari 5200 to the Colecovision, there are definitely some trade-offs between the two. I would say that the Colecovision is generally better, but there are some advantages to the 5200. But now let's take a look at a completely different comparison, one that might seem a little odd. Let's give a shot to comparing the Atari 5200 to its predecessor, the Atari 2600. This comparison might seem a bit strange, but it's important to look at. By 1982, the Atari VCS, which was now renamed to the 2600, was doing very well. Atari had assumed the platform would be dead by 1980, but they were completely wrong. Now, why would you buy an out-of-date system like the 2600 over the new, ultra-powerful super console, the 5200? Well, in this case, the obvious answer is the right one: cost. To the public at large, video games were a fad that could go away any day now. They didn't really understand all that techno mumbo-jumbo that was used to sell the new system. They may have understood that this new one was better, but the how and why it was better was mostly lost. Frankly, for most people, the 2600 was good enough. And with the 2600 dropping to new low prices, it was pretty attractive. I mean, which would you want? A cheap system with hundreds of games on it, including all the arcade hits like Donkey Kong, or a system that costs more, over 3 times more, with less games on it? Even better, if somehow a bargain bin 2600 is too expensive for you, then there's always the Coleco Gemini. It plays all the same games and is even cheaper than a 2600. What a deal! So now you see why consumers might have been tempted to go with the budget offering. But the 2600 is not the only internal competition that the 5200 faced. Let's take a look at, well, the system that I constantly think about when it comes to the Atari 5200. The one I constantly have to ask, why not just get an Atari 400 instead? Think about it. Prices on the 8-bit machines had dropped so much by 1982 that the entry-level 400 could often be found with sales or rebates at a price significantly lower than the 5200. Comparing them, you get almost exactly the same graphics and sound capabilities, a more established game library, tried-and-true controllers, and oh yeah, it's a full computer too, with all the applications and expandability that comes with. It even has a keyboard! A bad keyboard, but still! I think the internal rivalry between the video game and computer divisions of Atari did more damage than a lot of people realized. Instead of synergizing and building the Atari ecosystem up, the 5200 and 8-bit lines fundamentally harmed each other. The 5200's amazing graphics seemed less special once you figured out that they had already been available elsewhere for 3 years. And the 8-bit line missed out on a lot of mass-market success due to the 5200 pulling away sales. Something that may have been disastrous, considering that a massive 3-way battle between the Atari 8-bit line, the Texas Instruments TI-99 4A, and the Commodore 64 was right around the corner. It's something to think about. The Atari 5200 would in the end be a pretty major bomb for Atari, selling just about 1 million consoles in its 2-year life. Yeah, 2 years. Yup. 1982 to 1984, baby. It's even worse than that actually, since it was cancelled quite early in the year in May of 1984, when it was also announced that a new system, the Atari 7800, was coming, which is a story for another time. So now we have to discuss the question poised at the beginning of this saga. Was the 5200 that bad? No, it wasn't. It wasn't a great console for the time, but it wasn't that bad. Was it one of the worst consoles of all time, like said in our Colecovision video? Absolutely not. So I apologize. But sure, it wasn't one of the worst consoles of all time. But I'd argue that it is now. Looking at just how poorly this system has aged, and the overall lack of unique selling points, plus the general cost of getting one of these in working order, and the rather small library of games that are getting harder and harder to find, I wouldn't recommend picking one of these up to any modern collector except die-hard Atari collectors who are nostalgic for the 5200. This system is one that is best left in the past. That's why it's such a shame that there haven't been any notable examples of a 5200 flashback style console. The 2600 gets a new revival every other week. Seriously, check under your couch cushion, you'll find a 2600 flashback down there. And even the 7800 has gotten some focus in flashback consoles, but not the 5200. The 5200 is a great contender for a standalone modern release. I think fixing the 5200's issues by doing things like providing a modern centering joystick while keeping the good parts, like the great aesthetics and the solid game library, would be really nice. But until then, it's best to enjoy the 5200 from a distance. Either play some of the games through an emulator, which does lose some of the appeal of the experience, but, you know, it's easy, or give the 5200 a shot at a convention or something where you can access it and play it without having to spend money on it, something like that. I would not advise investing your hard-earned money into one. And now for the ratings. Rarity, 4 out of 5. Only around 1 million were sold, and I'm sure many were tossed out after they stopped working, making this a pretty rare console. Price, 1 out of 5. Between the climbing prices on systems and games, and the large cost of repairing your system, this is one only for those with big pockets. Aesthetics, 4 out of 5. Despite the fact that these things scratch really easy, I love their aesthetics. It's no surprise that Atari would reuse this design for the 7800 and the 2600 Junior. Games, 3 out of 5. I would say that the games available on the 5200 are overall pretty decent. It's a pretty small library, but it is one filled with good versions of classic arcade games. Convenience, 0 out of 5. This is not a system you can just get into on a whim. Do your research and prepare for some unforeseen headaches along the way. Well, I hope you enjoyed this look at the Atari 5200. Even with devoting 2 separate videos to it, there's still a lot I wanted to say about the 5200 that just didn't fit into this video, so if there's something specific you'd like us to talk about regarding this very, very interesting system in the future, let us know in the comments down below. Also, please make sure to join our Discord server, where you can talk to me directly about how much you feel the 5200 is under or overrated, or any number of other retro video game topics. Also, if you'd like to help this show running, you can check out our Patreon. And please, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell for notifications. And I will see you on the next episode of Video Game Retrospective.